Hello, and are we ready? Are we ready for the next topic that we are going to discuss today? And that is gender and dance. I hope you have an interest in it because this is a subject very dear to me. Now, I don't know how much you have already thought about gender or dance. I hope you've thought about both. But much of the study and writing on dance in India in the 20th century came from two positions. Either it came from the practice and consisted of a listing in print, a documentation, or came from the point of demystification of the practice. In classical dance, this writing included, apart from these trends that I've just mentioned, a deep concern for and a seeking of linkages. A seeking of linkages with the classical or traditional or ancient texts. This stemmed from the fact that the discovery by India, now hear what I'm saying, the discovery by India of her dance heritage coincided with the realization of a colonized status, and it became one of the fields of the waging of the anti-colonial struggle. It was during this anti-colonial struggle that different parts of India became acquainted with each other. The vision widened. Suddenly you knew how wide and varied India was. Thus, in this process of discovering India, one discovered the diversity of dance practices and therefore the novelty of ethnographically documenting them, reading about them, comparing them with each other, and particularly to your own dance practices, your own local dance practices, became a very important aspect of the growing Indian consciousness. And these were the kind of subjects that were the initial matter or material of writing on dance. Now, in the initial decades of colonial rule, while the economic, agricultural and manufacturing bases of Indian society were immediately and extensively interfered with in keeping with colonial policies, many of the cultural practices were left untouched. Not just that, many colonists, that is, many colonialists themselves, patronized Indian arts. They hosted dance performances by what they called the Nautch girls. They maintained their own personal Nautch troupes. They attempted to appreciate their way of life. Many of them even cohabited with the Nautch girls, and there are instances in history where some of them married them. The post-Place British nabobs, as they were called, even dressed native in their desire to integrate with Indian cultural and social life. It was often the Orientalist Indologist who, in pursuit of his studies and fascination with India, ended up becoming the first one to produce the early writings on dance and dancers of India. Actually, the Indian nationalists were stung by a claim that a section of the colonial community made, that they were on a civilizing mission in India. Civilizing mission. This claim compelled the nationalists to challenge it, and then began the search for clues to the antiquity of India's cultural traditions, and the efforts to revive various art forms, and the search for ancient manuscripts and old texts. This occupied the imagination of those Indian nationalists who were in the fight against colonialism, but who were also associated with the cultural life of India And there were many like this. In the case of music, to buttress this argument about the abundance of material and the practices that were the patrimony of Indians for thousands of years, the musical material was arranged in categories, and in some cases newer texts were written as if to make sense of and codify the many riches, musical riches of India. Bhatkhande's Hindustani Sangeet Paddhati is an example of one such work. However, social issues and indices like gender were not the concern of modern day dance scholarship in India till about the last quarter of the 20th century. But socially, gender issues had cast a much longer shadow on dance. In fact, they came into play by the end of the 19th century, when the Anti-Devdasi movement began, with the aim of abolishing the professional performing women artists of India, as by now these performing women artists, who are known by many names, Devdasis, Tawavs, etc., were socially stigmatized and were associated with what was considered a non-ideal lifestyle and sexually deviant choices. The Anti-Devdasi movement played out throughout India and was known as the Anti-Devdasi movement in the south. There is a difference between Devdasis and Tawavs. Tawavs were for entertainment alone, while Devdasis were literally servants of the gods and were often dedicated to them for life. A wedding ceremony sanctioned this association, and the temple provided for these women, in lieu of which they had to participate in some of the rituals of the temples. This practice of dedicating women was widespread in many parts of India. In Odisha, such temple dances were known as Maharis, and in Assam as Nattis. These dedicated ritual specialists, excelling in song and dance, were once highly regarded, and there exist many references to devotees prostrating themselves before them and collecting the dust from under their feet. Devdasis of the south are also known by various other local terms, such as Joginis in Telangana, Basavis in Karnataka, and Matangis in Maharashtra. They were also known as Venkatasanis in Andhra. Many other local words exist for them. Traditionally, Devdasis spent their time honing their skills instead of becoming a housewife. Even where they set up households, other members, like the mother or sister, would manage the household duties, leaving the chief practitioner time to follow their art. If they found a patron and entered into a liaison, it was clear that their practice was not to be disturbed. They had children from their patron husbands, who were also taught their skill of music and dance. But it was not necessary that they would become practitioners. Even when the office of Devdasi became hereditary, it did not confer the right to work on the new incumbent unless it was supported by adequate qualifications. Devdasis quite caught the imagination of foreign artists, as we have a host of well-known pieces about the Indian bayadère, a term that means dancer in the French language. Even Ruth St. Denis created a rather popular piece on the Indian Nautch girl in 1932 after her visit to India, where she did try and meet Nautch girls, but by then the institution had already nearly disappeared. Over time, three things went against these dedicated temple dancers. Firstly, as the pattern of patronage changed with the coming of the British, the temples themselves fell on poorer times, and the patronage they were getting either ceased or shrunk drastically. Secondly, the fact that they came from lower castes or mixed and compromised castes, a demographic fact, was used to marginalize them. Finally, the fact that they were accused of promiscuity helped the stigma against them grow to such an extent that although there existed categories of dedicated dancers and professional singing women such as the Bhitar Gauni Mahari, who would only dance exclusively for the pleasure of Lord Jagannath in the Puri temple, and the Deredar Tawavs, who lived all her life for just one patron and conducted herself with the utmost decorum. All of them were painted with one brush as common sex workers. In the case of the Tawavs or dancing girls of northern and western India, unburdened by any commitment to God or temple, with the changing patterns of wealth and power, they too changed their patrons from the old nobility to the newly born class of English professionals and military men who resided in cantonments. However, in both cases, the issue at stake was far more than just social stigma arising from preconceived. Ironically, it was started by the British, but it played out with the help of Indians and Indian organizations. They were well-meaning social reformers who contributed to the marked drop of the status of the professional performing women artists. In the 19th century, Hindu reformers, reacting to the taunts of Victorian missionaries, began to attack the institution of temple dancers and what they called as sacred prostitution. Successive waves of colonial and post-colonial legislation came and slowly but steadily broke the ancient links between the Devdasi and the temple, driving the women out of the temple precincts and eroding their social, economic and spiritual position. Thus, many Indians were behind what is known as the anti-Nautch and anti-dedication movements. The first anti-Nautch and anti-dedication movement was launched as early as 1882 by political and social reformers, by doctors, journalists and social workers. All of them came together and urged the abolition of all ceremonies and procedures by which girls dedicated themselves as Devdasis of Hindu shrines. They organized seminars and conferences to create public opinion against the Devdasi system. Letters to the editors were written. In fact, in the later part of 1892, an appeal was made to the Viceroy and the Governor General of India and to the Governor of Madras to support the anti-Nautch and anti-dedication movement. This appeal is very significant, for it defines the position of the anti-Nautch movement. The portrayal of the Devdasi system as prostitution sought to advertise the grotesqueness of the subject population for political ends. This was pretty much a case of the pot calling the kettle black, for it was the British colonial authorities who officially supported the sex trade in India with their registers of sexual workers, especially in towns and cantonment areas in particular, because they attempted, through this practice of maintaining registers and supposedly keeping a close eye, they attempted to control the rampant spread of sexually transmitted diseases. The impact, of course, was in demotivating the link between the Devdasi and the temples. The Anti-Devdasi initiative fed the argument for a change of rule on the ground of civilizing function. The movement initially concentrated on building public opinion and enlisting members to refuse to attend Nautch parties and to refuse to invite Devdasis to festivities to their homes. Around 1899, the anti-Nautch and Puritan movement turned its attention to stopping dedications. And everything was just building up against the Devdasi. The anti-Nautch movement paved the way for anti-dedication movement. The social reform movement was spearheaded mostly by men like Ram Mohan Roy, Pera, Muthaiya Mudaliar, Sir C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, C.N. Annadurai, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Govind Ranade, Dhondu Keshav Karve, and other prominent thinkers, there was one woman at the helm of affairs, and that was Dr. Muthuswamy Reddy, and that was Dr. Muthulakshmi Reddy, a qualified woman doctor who went on to become the first woman legislator in India. They all questioned the practice of the Devdasi system, ignoring the artistic role that the Devdasi played. The much beleaguered Devdasi received some support from an unlikely quarter, the Theosophical Society, the founder members of which had undertaken a tour and realized that this abolition would impact the practice of the beautiful dance of Sadir or Dasiyatam. Later, Bharatanatyam was to emerge from it. In 1882, the Theosophical Society of India had set up its headquarters at Adyar in Chennai with the set goal of working towards the restoration of India's ancient glory in art, science and philosophy. That is why the term given to the supporters of the art of these stigmatized practitioners was revivalists. In their hands, the revival of the art took place, albeit in changed forms and by different practitioners. Later, Adyar was to host Kalakshetra, the dance school set up by the eminent theosophist Rukmani Devi Arundale, who became the first high caste woman in modern times to train and perform the erstwhile dance of the Devdasis publicly. Regrettably, even Kalakshetra eventually ignored the traditional female dancer, although it made space for the males of the traditional families to serve as accompanying musicians, natavunars and even gurus. Although the effort has been on for long and had been mostly successful, the first legal initiative to outlaw the Devdasi was the 1934 Bombay Devdasi Protection Act, followed by the Madras Devdasi Prevention of Dedication Act in 1947. Eventually, however, the Devdasi system was outlawed in all of India only in the 1988. Yet women and some transgenders too continue to dance in bars. Initially, dance bars were only found in Maharashtra, but later they spread across the country and could be found in many cities. The ban of 2005 on the bar dancers was for the same reason as the anti-nautch ban. In this case, the High Court of Maharashtra and the Supreme Court of India came to the aid of the harassed bar dancers, who number several thousand. In the case of Odisha, the gender profile is different. The Odissi dance has been reconstructed from the dance of the Maharis, Sakhinata, as well as the dance of the Gotipuas. Gotipuas are boy dancers who dance in female costumes. The same happens in Sakhinata, which is more common in the southern part of Odisha, particularly the Ganjam district. This is a throwback on the Vaishnav principle that there is only one Param Purush, and that is Vishnu, while all others are female devotees seeking union with him. The Gotipuas are mostly from Raghurajpur near Puri. Goti means one and Pua means boy, which would appear to suggest that the boys dance singly. But increasingly the pattern is for them to dance in groups. This facilitates the bandha or acrobatic part of their dance and permits them to build human pyramids with which they embellish their dance. Sakhinata and Gotipua dance is practiced and taught in gymnasia called akhada. Despite the fact that most of the gurus who refashioned Odissi had a Gotipua association and the borrowings from their repertoire is palpable, the dance of the Gotipua does not make the grade to a classical dance category and therefore enjoys negligible patronage. Regrettably, when Odissi dance was recrafted and largely became the preserve of women, the demanding part of the dance, namely bandha or the acrobatic content, was abandoned. This is how gender shifts can shrink the knowledge base of traditional knowledge and its practice. With reference to the Maharis, it becomes pertinent to point out that the Madalapanji or the temple register for the Jagannath Puri temple in 1956 cited as many as 11 Maharis in service. But very fast the numbers kept dwindling, and the last of these, Shashi Prabha, although she stopped performing seva a long time ago, passed away earlier in 2015. With her death, the doors of this institution have been closed permanently. Interestingly, some modern day dancers have expressed a desire to dance for the Lord in the sanctum sanctorum of the temple, including the renowned dancer Sanjukta Panigrahi. In fact, in many temples like Chidambaram in Tamil Nadu, the temple dance festival permits the dancer to perform briefly before the deity. Today, the number of female Odissi dancers is astounding compared to the few male dancers who practice this form. In Assam, the position is somewhat different. Assam had a strong and robust tradition of male dancing that happened in satras or the Vaishnav monasteries and in the namghars or community prayer halls as part of the theatrical production of bhavnas and the ritual dances. These dance forms emerged out of the composite theatre practice that included song and dance, which Sriman Shankar Dev introduced towards the end of the 15th century. His purpose was to have them carry the message of the Bhakti movement in Assam. Now, till the middle of the last century, these dances were performed mostly by male dancers, particularly monk dancers. Amongst them were celibate monks. With the state recognition accorded to this dance in the year 2000, the agenda, location and population of the dances changed. It is still performed in the monasteries by the celibate monks and in prayer halls across Assam with a strong devotional intent, but it is increasingly being danced for entertainment in modern auditoriums, far removed from its original and sacred context. What is more startling, however, is how fast the gender of its performance population has changed. Today, the face of Satriya is the female dancer. In the case of Kathak dance, the issue of gender is not only to be seen in the roles of the populations associated with the dance, but also its repertoire and oral scape. Because of the stigma associated with the Tawaf or Baijis, who found no redemption as they could not claim any sacred linkages, they were so completely marginalized that they were totally obfuscated from the scene. The male dancers found a welcoming environment and became the Gharanedar gurus. The Maharaj family, with Achan Maharaj and his younger brothers Shambhu and Lachu Maharaj, followed by Achan Maharaj's son Birju Maharaj, became the first family of Kathak. The female dancers who populated the dance space in Kathak came from upper caste and high class families. Very few women, if any, survived from families of traditional performing women artists. The earliest significant female name known from the modern avatar of Kathak was that of Madam Menaka, who enjoyed a high social standing. She herself was so dismissive of the Tawaf association that she banned the use of the sarangi, since its plaintive sound would evoke immediately images of the kotha. Further, she dropped all gestures and items that were associated with the professional women, replacing them with Sanskrit poems and elegant stage presentations. The new institutions, especially government institutions that came up around Kathak, neglected the treasure of deep knowledge that the professional women carried with them. These institutions acknowledged and sanctified male knowledge. Unrecognized, unsung and unsupported, this talent went waste and atrophied, and regrettably, traditional knowledge was completely lost. The Tawaf has been romanticized in Hindi cinema. Pakiza and Umrao Jan come immediately to mind as examples. Although the golden-hearted Tawaf has been a continuing motif in Hindi cinema, she found reflection even this year in Muzaffar Ali's Janisar. Gidd, The Vultures, is a 1984 Hindi film directed by T.S. Ranga, starring Smita Patil, Om Puri and Nana Patekar, that won the Special Jury Award at the 32nd National Film Awards for its in-depth depiction of the helplessness of people struggling against the Devdasi tradition. Shringaram, a 2007 film that saw the debut of Aditi Rao Hyadri, a trained dancer who had spent several years in training with Leela Sampson. The film depicts the life of a Devdasi during the 1920s. It was highly acclaimed, winning 3 prizes at the 53rd National Film Awards, besides several state and international accolades. In a landmark judgment in 2014, the Supreme Court of India recognized the transgenders as the third gender. Although it sanctioned a socially and economically backward status to them, they did not create any artistic validation for them, although the third gender is known to have unique and scarcely known artistic practices. This lack of valorization of their age-old practices by the government is another example of insensitivity to gender issues. In Indian dance, the male principal is believed to be Shiva and the female principal Parvati. Their combined form, a reflection of the composite and comprehensive being, is Ardhanarishwar. Although in India, specifically Andhra, there is a tradition of an Ardhanarishwar dance performed with help of the body attired as Shiva in one half and as Parvati in the other. Often, a member of the third gender is known as a true representative of Ardhanarishwar. In effect, the public discourse around dance emanated from within the nationalist discourse. This discourse was filtered through a social and political prism. Hence, dance and the dancer had to subscribe to this image of the ideal vision. This vision sanctioned primarily a high caste, patriarchal Hindu vision that feared sexual deviation more than it supported excellence in the arts and more than it supported rich, deep and diverse cultural knowledge and practices. In the name of the nation, a nationalist culture was constructed, but at a cost. This vision rejected the traditional dancer and represented the new Indian citizen. This vision is reiterated time and again in policies of patronage that the state follows. In the terminology used to describe the art and in subscribing to patterns of groupings and codifications of the artistic material available. It is reflected almost daily on television and repeated so frequently that it eventually becomes everyone's idea of what is worth valuing. Thus, performing the nation by way of performing the cultural values and the correct imagery became a part of the agenda of the restructuring process of the newly classicized dances. The list of classical dances went on increasing over the last 6 decades, but of all the classical dances, there is only one classical dance that is exclusively performed by women, Mohiniyattam. It is interestingly named after a woman too. As a high art, dance, only if it reflects all the values valorized by the national vision, gets to perform the core of the nation, a privilege given to very few. These are the practitioners of the classical dances. For the others, they get to represent the staggering diversity of India, which is reflected in her many folk dances. In the process, many women-oriented forms are disappearing, such as Maibi Jagoi, Nupi Pala, both from Manipur, Ariyar Sevai too. Most of the group dances by women are reduced to the grade of folk dances that come a poor second to the solo classical forms. Some practices continue to be marked by stigma. Several of the very attractive women's only dances like those of the Kalbelias, Nachnis, Rai dances continue to enjoy a certain notoriety as dances of solicitation. To some extent, the commodification of a professional woman dancer, whether a group dancer or a soloist, has been driven by the tourism industry. which decontextualizes the dance and the dancer to such an extent that instead of having the original resonances of community or skill, it ends up becoming a mere mechanical source of livelihood. And even this pursuit of livelihood becomes a struggle along gendered lines. Bollywood continues to reinforce the commodification of women dancers through its highly eroticized item numbers. The swaying hips and heaving chests of Bollywood dancers can independently from the rest of the film, whose name may even not be remembered, successfully drive into the auditoriums, the large audiences. But by and large, item numbers are not beneficial to women, for they strengthen the male gaze and encourage the objectification and commodification of women. In contrast, many of the recent dance-oriented stories, ABCD comes to mind immediately, help mainstream dance as life choices. When you talk gender, you cannot but talk about the spirit of the Indian woman. And in today's times, we need to talk and take into cognizance the spirit of the modern Indian woman. Now, an example of how dance goes against the spirit of the modern Indian woman stems from the fact that much of the content of classical dance comes from the bhakti tradition of surrender and often uses imageries like falling at the feet of the god, or the veil or ghungat, or the female pandering in many ways to the male. Now, how does the modern Indian woman practitioner of dance align herself with these feudal or medieval images? Think about it. Many of you are practitioners or no practitioners. Have you thought about it? Have you thought about how today's woman aligns herself to some of the images of dance? How relevant is the search for new subjects then? Is it relevant at all? Now, many powerful women who also dance, like the late Chandralekha or Malika Sarabhai, have been compelled to create a new and bold repertoire because they just couldn't come to terms with what was the content of the traditional repertoire. Now, this is not just a woman only question, it concerns men also. For instance, given the fact that most of the poetry used in dance is in the feminine voice, how do men identify with it? Women who dance in India today have stories to tell you about exploitation. But men who dance in India tell stories of a different kind, of limited and further restricted opportunities. So you see, it's not fair on either gender. And all of this seems to suggest that the arts may not be the preferred route to choose for a professional career by any gender, unless the choice of art is driven by an uncontrolled passion. Now, if that be the case, then nothing matters. You will not just dance, you will not just take what is given to you as your patrimony, but you will go well beyond it, as many before you have gone. But all of that requires a thinking mind. So, think as you dance. Think many things. And if you live in today's world, you cannot but think of gender in dance, which was the subject of today's session. I hope that you were with me in it, and that if nothing else, I have initiated some thinking in your mind. Thank you.